Olá a todos. É um prazer enorme fazer essa conversa aqui, realizar essa conversa aqui no Ronda Poetica com duas das maiores representantes da nossa poesia aqui no Canadá. Meu nome é Ingrid Bejerman, eu sou a sua anfitriã, eu serei a sua anfitriã aqui no Ronda Poetica. Então, eu acho que a gente vai começar por apresentar as duas poetas e depois a gente vai ter uma conversa em inglês e francês, que são os dois idiomas oficiais aqui do Canadá, para vocês ouvirem bem como é que é a voz, os versos na sua versão, na sua integridade e na beleza, na sua musicalidade original. Bom, vou começar então apresentando a Anne Michaels. Aqui eu tenho um dos seus livros, esse livro está traduzido em francês, mas bom, vou ler um pouquinho, rapidinho, apresentar aqui a Anne Michaels. Os livros de Anne Michaels foram traduzidos para mais de 45 idiomas e ganharam dezenas de prêmios internacionais, incluindo o Orange Prize, o Guardian Fiction Prize, o Lannan Award for Fiction e o Commonwealth Poetry Prize para as Américas. Ela recebeu títulos honorários, a Bolsa Guggenheim e muitas outras honras. Ela foi indicada para o prêmio do Governador-Geral, o prêmio Griffin de Poesia, 2 vezes para o prêmio Giller e 2 para o prêmio Impact. Seu romance Fugitive Pieces foi adaptado para o cinema. De 2015 a 2019, ela foi Poet Laureate de Toronto. Welcome, Anne. It's a pleasure to have you here. E agora a Judy Quinn, apresento a Judy Quinn. Esse livro é maravilhoso, Tout est caché, e o da Anne chama em francês Tout ce que nous avons vu. A gente vai falar um pouquinho mais dos livros agora, mas vou apresentar a Judy, que nasceu na cidade de Québec e estudou literatura na Université do Québec a Montréal e na Université de Toulouse-Les Mirailles, na França. Ela é crítica literária e editora do jornal literário Nuit Blanche. Ela também contribuiu para várias publicações, incluindo Le Devoir, que é um jornal bem importante aqui de Quebec. Quinn publicou 3 coleções de poesia, Le Monde em 2008, 6h20 em 2010 e Les Damnés Infinis em 2012. Recebeu o Prix Littéraire Canada e o Prix Félix Antoine Savard, pela sua poesia. Em 2012, publicou o romance Hunter se la Sécoulé, que recebeu o prêmio Robert Clich. Foi também finalista do Grand Prix Littéraire Archambault. Em 2013, foi escritora residente na Cité Internationale des Arts de Paris. Bienvenue, Judy, c'est un plaisir d'être avec toi. Donc, je vais commencer cette conversation bilingue dans l'esprit canadien pour que notre public au Portugal et en Europe internationale peut nous entendre in our difficulties of living with this bilingual reality that we have here. We also have 60 and over indigenous languages as well. But I think that's a very interesting thing about our country in the continent, and all of the Americas is the only country that's fully bilingual, that has 2 official languages. Donc, on va commencer par ça. I would like to do a very open question, and I'll start with Anne. But because both of your books have to deal with, both of these lovely books deal with love and mourning. And I would like, Anne, for you to reflect a little bit on, these such universal topics. How do you personally approach love and mourning? What does that mean to you to be a poet and writing about love and mourning? Whatever, I think it is open-ended as possible. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Well, especially when trying to speak about death, what language is chaste enough, spare enough to speak about death? Some poems emerge from silence, other poems emerge from speechlessness, muteness. And so in thinking about mourning and the expression of to give some words to the experience of death, I'm very aware that language must not violate that muteness, but somehow preserve it. And also that in writing, I must be absolutely intimate, but not personal. So those distinctions between silence and muteness, between what is intimate and what is personal, are very important to me, because you want the reader to not be reflecting on my life, but to be reflecting on their own life.
Merci, thank you, Anne. And for you, Judy, pour toi, c'est comment aborder les thèmes du deuil, de la mort, de l'amour comme poète pour toi? Ça signifie quoi? Comment est-ce que tu parles? Ça signifie quoi pour toi de parler de l'amour et de la mort comme poète?
Je cherche pas à parler de l'amour et de la mort, c'est des thèmes qui s'imposent d'eux-mêmes. Je dirais, j'aimerais ça, ne pas en parler. Non, l'amour, d'accord. La mort, j'aimerais ne pas en parler, mais je crois que tous les poètes sont un peu obsédés par la mort et que c'est la question centrale. L'amour dans tout ça, ben, peut-être, en tout cas dans le recueil, c'est la seule porte de sortie, si on veut, par rapport à cette obsession de la mort. Voilà, je sais pas quoi dire parce que c'est tellement vaste, là. Dans le recueil, c'est abordé de multiples façons. Je parle d'un voyage en Inde que j'ai fait il y a pas si longtemps que ça. Et mon père venait de mourir et ça me plongeait dans un questionnement sur l'absence, sur ce qui reste, sur la disparition. Alors, voilà.
Merci, merci Judy. C'est difficile pour nous qui fait l'entrevue parce que nous sommes lecteurs aussi. On reçoit les poèmes d'une façon, ça nous touche d'une façon, mais parler à l'auteur, le poète, moi je trouve qu'il y a une différence entre parler avec les poètes et lire les poèmes. Donc c'est un peu intimidant. Qu'est-ce que tu veux dire ici? Parce que moi je les lis comme ça, right? When you read something in a specific way, the poems touch me immensely, and it's hard to speak to the poets, you know, because it's my interpretation, because it's so personal, right? So. Yes, it's and I wanted to talk then a little bit about the l'office d'être poète, like of the practice of being a poet, and to be a Canadian poet, and to be both of you poets that are very renowned, very recognized with multiple awards and multiple and a lot of recognition and translation. What does it mean to you, Anne and Judy, to be a Canadian poet, or Judy a Quebec poet, and in terms of the language, in terms of your relationship to Canada, in terms of your experience as a Canadian citizen or as living here, the environment of Canada? You know, think if you're speaking to an audience in Portugal, what's particular about Canada or your particular experience, including the language, in the craft? How does that inform your craft?
Vous voulez que je réponde? Ou...
Oui, OK, on peut commencer avec Judy, et puis oui, on peut commencer avec Judy, et puis après avec Anne. Parfait.
Ben moi, j'ai seulement une œuvre de traduite en anglais, et je trouve que ben, je connais pas, par exemple, je connais pas l'œuvre de Madame Michaels. Il y a peu de communication, en fait, entre les poètes francophones et les poètes anglophones. C'est des groupes assez fermés, peut-être, là, qui gagneraient beaucoup à partager leurs œuvres, mais en fait, il faudrait que ça soit un peu plus traduit là, et diffusé.
Merci, Judy. C'est intéressant ce que tu dis, parce que quand j'allais placer les livres d'Anne Michaels à ma bibliothèque, j'ai vu qu'elle a écrit les blurbs ici du livre de Rosemary Sullivan. Elle a écrit l'endorsement in the back that I mentioned it to Michael and to Anne, and it touched me immensely, you know, that I thought, wow, it's like the books go together, you know, it's you put Anne and they almost match. And then Anne mentioned to me that Rosemary is a very dear friend. She's a very dear friend of mine as well. So apparently, I mean, in the Anglo scene, there is that friendship, right? There is that connection. There is that scene. And can you tell us a little bit about that, and also how you see yourself in the scene? And you are translated. I mean, this one is in French. So if you want to speak a little bit about, you know, your relationship to Canadian poetry, again, everything that I mentioned, what it means to be a Canadian poet, in other words.
Well, we all are very informed by place, where we are from, where we live. I've been very fortunate because I'm a novelist also, that my work has been translated in more than 50 languages. So the exchange from one language to another, that affection and love that moves from one language to another when trying to speak to each other, this has been very central to what I do. I'm very, very excited and touched that my language, all my books now have been translated and published separately in Quebec. That is extremely important to me. It's astonishing to me that this does not happen more often, that this is more rare than common to have a Quebec edition of an English Canadian language book. And so I hope that more and more this exchange becomes not a rarity, but something common, and that that exchange can happen far more frequently than it does now.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. I wanted to ask about each other's relationship with each other's language. Actually, with Judy, I wanted je voulais commencer avec ça parce que Judy a un nom qui est très anglophone ou qui semble anglophone quand on le lit la première fois. Judy, est-ce que tu peux nous raconter un petit peu? Oui, mais l'histoire de ton nom, l'histoire de ta langue, c'est ta relation avec la langue française aussi, parce que tu parles un peu de français. Oui.
Bon, ma langue maternelle, c'est le français, mais effectivement, mon nom est anglais, est irlandais, en fait. Mon arrière-grand-père était irlandais et il est arrivé à Québec qui est une ville francophone, et il s'est fait... non, il est resté dans un milieu anglophone, mais mon grand-père, bon, sa mère est décédée très tôt, son père aussi, si bien qu'il a été adopté et par des anglophones, mais ça ne s'est pas perpétué, et mon père a appris l'anglais aussi, malgré tout, mais il a détesté l'anglais, et il nous a élevés dans la haine de l'anglais. Voilà. Alors, les gens me parlent en anglais et je comprends, mais je ne parle pas de façon...
Merci, Judy. Merci beaucoup de... Merci, Judy. Merci de partager un peu de ta histoire avec nous. J'aimerais juste te demander, parce que tu mentionnes ton background irlandais, qui est un pays qui a une grande tradition de poésie, bien sûr. Donc, est-ce que tu as une relation avec la poésie ou la littérature irlandaise en particulier, par ton héritage, ou pas nécessairement?
Non, par contre, je suis une grande lectrice de poésie américaine et de littérature, de romans américains. J'aime beaucoup anglaise aussi, j'aime beaucoup tout ce qui est donc littérature anglo-saxonne.
Parfait, merci, Judy. And then, if you can tell us a little bit about your personal history with the and relationship to the English language in particular, and to writing in English.
Well, we everything we are comes from language, from our language, from how we think, perceive, is completely entwined in the words we reach for, the words that come into our mouths. We cannot separate our thought from our language, and so and yet, of course, within that language, and English being now so predominant, perhaps sadly, we experience the difference. American language is different from Canadian language. Canadian English, British English is different from English that has been works that have been translated into English. There are so many nuances, but this is our richness. This is the great history of our culture, that these nuances and differences exist. And so for me, if I read an American poet, I can perceive a difference in the English language being expressed from how a Canadian poet. You may say this is perhaps false distinctions or these nuances perhaps aren't there. There is more of a kind of the genre has become flattened, but I don't believe so. Also, of course, individually, a word has its different soul within a person. So one's own intimate response to the word, to any word, is also mitigated by one's own experience, one's own life. So that to me is the beauty and the richness of any language.
Thank you so much, Anne. For me, it's as I mentioned, it's nicer to talk about the process and the craft of writing poetry than to actually talk about your poems, because as I mentioned, it's such a personal reading that one has. I realize it as a journalist, as a moderator, how intimidated I am to actually get to discuss the poets, the poems themselves. So this is why I'm going to ask both of you now, just to make sure that we have the time, that you read us the selected poem that you chose to share with us. We would love to hear you. Your verses in your own language, and with your own accent, and as read by you. So on commence par Judy. Judy, est-ce que tu peux nous dire aussi pourquoi tu as choisi ces poèmes spécifiquement et les partager avec nous, et on attend avec beaucoup de anticipation ta lecture.
J'ai choisi quelques poèmes qui concernent justement la mort de mon père, qui était au cœur du livre. Le cœur évanescent. Donc, je vais vous lire 3-4 poèmes. Toujours est-il que mon père, mort, me reconduit à bicyclette vers l'hôtel royal de luxe. La moustache a sa place sur le visage. Son visage, c'est tout ce qui lui reste. Un dimanche, par la fenêtre du second, il s'était mis à tirer sur les chats errants avec des plombs parachutes qui ne faisaient que les blesser. Il souriait comme un enfant, découvrant ses dents rongées par l'alcool et le tabac. Je m'étais alors enfui dans une ville lointaine et on lui avait arraché toutes les dents. Et à mon retour, édenté, il me souriait encore. Quand les chats, devenus des bêtes, sauvages et maléfiques, ont été relâchés, il souriait, avec des lèvres de plâtre. Même après sa mort, quand on a donné son fusil. Des dizaines d'exemplaires de mon père sortent des boutiques, impossible de distinguer lequel est le vrai, toutes époques confondues, gras, pantalons camouflage, nez cassé. Je lance une autre pierre dans le canal, l'après-midi passe. L'un des sosies me pointe les ruines d'un salon de quilles. Ses doigts sont si longs qu'un corbeau s'y pose. J'ai le vague souvenir d'avoir tété des chips devant des dallos vides. Les pierres se réveillent et étincellent. Le réceptionniste se jette sur le lit. Hanté par son passé, il refuse de réintégrer son corps. Il a peur des coups de grisou. Il voudrait qu'on le porte dans nos cœurs. Je soulève sa chemise, c'est vrai, jusqu'à mon père qui est passé par ici. Il aurait peut-être mieux valu rester nu et attendre que les arbres, prenant pitié, abrient nos corps comme autant de miroirs d'eau. Quand tu dis « S'il te plaît, embrasse-moi », les arbres ne font que s'éloigner.
Merci beaucoup, Judy. Now, Anne, if you could please share with us some points. I may ask you to read a little bit more because, fortunately, we still, anyway, depending on the time. But this is so lovely to hear you read. Thank you, merci, Judy. Anne, if you could please also share with us why the selection.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much, Judy. That was very, very moving and beautiful to hear you read in your own voice. I'm going to read a poem called To Write, since this, I believe, speaks to both the act of writing and to the subject of death and love. To write, because the dead can read, because she thought everyone came home to find their family taken, because the one closest to her cannot speak, because he drew love into him from each body he entered, because they are keeping her from him, because the last time they met, he misunderstood her absolutely, because a finger can hold a place in a book, because a book rests in a lap, because words are secrets passed one to another on a train, the same train where letters were crammed between slats to be found by strangers, because they recognize each other over huge distances, because a true word everywhere is samizdat, because everything political is personal and not the other way around, because forgiveness is not about the past but the future and needs another word, because the true witness of your soul is sometimes one you've scorned, because it is possible to be married to someone who died many years before we were born, because he painted the intimate objects of their life together, not from observation, but from memory. Though surrounded by the teacups, the flowers, the garden, he retreated to his small room to paint, each object transformed by love. Because words are mirrors that set fire to paper. Because every day she risked her life for him. Because he remembered this too late. Because he was mistaken. Because he was certain. Because certainty and doubt consume each other like dogs in a parable. Because of a Sunday morning in London. Because of a cemetery in Wales. Because of a mountain and a river. Because he imagined himself an orphan. Because an infant cannot carry herself. Because of drawings on fax paper. Because she sends her SMS with broken thumbs and an empty battery. Because to be heard, we do not need a pencil, and we do not even need a tongue, and we do not even need a body. Because the one who holds the pen, even if it's too dark to see the page, and even if the ink is his own blood, is free. Because an action can never be erased by a word. Because we set down what we cannot bear to remember. Because we cannot take back what we sang. Because the dead can read.
Thank you so much, Anna. I have goosebumps. This was absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much. It's bizarre to go back to questions after of leaving this. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to ask you both to read again, because I would like to finish on this with your own words and your own the music of your own recitation, of your own reciting of which is absolutely beautiful. But my one question has to do exactly with. I mean, it's an obvious question, but it's also a complicated question, because I wanted to ask you about the creative process itself of poetry. How do you receive the words? What is your creative process in general, your writing process? I know that novelists tend to be very, very disciplined and to sit down and to write, but with poetry, is there a moment that just something comes to you and you feel that you have to rush and write it, or do you sit and you write the music also by laboring? I would like both of you to in your own way, to share with us, partager avec nous la procédure de l'écriture de la poésie, to share with us how it is that you do it. How do you create? Does it come from the divine? Does it come from inspiration? Does it come from a moment? Like how do you compose this musicality, this full of meaning and thoughts? So if both of you could share. On commence par Judy, et puis après Anne. How do you write poems? How does it happen?
Comment j'écris un poème? C'est sûr, moi aussi, je suis romancière et c'est très différent du roman. Le roman, on travaille avec une structure. Parfois, il y a des données historiques qu'on doit respecter. En poésie, on est vraiment plongé, lancé dans le flou. Souvent, on a un thème qui nous permet d'avoir un ancrage. et on commence à travailler. Moi, personnellement, je commence à travailler sur le thème dans un petit carnet. Quand j'ai assez de matériel, là, je m'en vais sur mon ordinateur, je commence à composer une structure, mais pour moi, le recueil est sans fin. C'est à un moment donné mon éditeur qui me dit c'est assez, on va publier, mais il évoluerait toujours et pas seulement au niveau esthétique, là, où il ne se peaufine pas, c'est qu'il évolue, le propos évolue. Et c'est ça, c'est sans fin. Mais bon, là, cette fois-ci, pour Tout est caché, j'ai eu un petit peu plus de temps. Donc, je suis allée peut-être un peu plus au bout de mes idées, mais parfois, dans des recueils, je peux rajouter 20 poèmes quelques semaines avant la publication. C'est comme ça.
Merci, Judy, and thank you, Anna. I wanted to preface that both of you write novels also, so and the process is, I mean, I know with novelists it tends to be what Judy said, right? Very disciplined, very, and Anne, how is it for you, the writing of poetry? I mean, how do you arrive to compose something so beautiful? So,
well, also, yes, I agree. As a novelist, you dig and dig and dig until you reach that place where where you hit the underground river and all the other rivers connect, and you're calibrating, 400 pages. But still, within poetry and fiction, whether you have 400 pages or 4 words, every word matters. No word can be wasted. So the calibration is at 2 different scales, but it's the same activity, the same calibration of not a word wasted. For me, poetry, you live with a receptivity, and poetry pierces you. You must pay attention. It is like you have been galvanized to pay attention. And because in essence, it is absolutely impossible to express. We are working to express what is inexpressible. That attention is absolutely necessary, even though we know we cannot possibly give language to what it is that is holding us so intently. So to me, it is a question of receptivity, for being embracing that thing that is too big to speak, and listening so carefully to that moment.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you so much. And now, just because we're at the end of the panel, as I mentioned, so if we could please just read it to a little bit more. Donc, on reste avec vos mots. Donc, Judy, tu lis par nous, et puis après pour nous, et puis après Anne, et on finit.
Comme ça, trouver un... Ah, ok, d'accord. Je vais réciter un poème très simple. J'ai mangé du chocolat et des fourmis, puis j'ai craché dans le lavabo, tandis que tu nous débarrassais des insectes ayant envahi la chambre. Tu es toujours le premier à t'endormir. Seras-tu là quand les fourmis me pourchasseront hors de ce lit? Pour moi, ce sera comme un rêve, sans image. Pour toi, la réalité. Et les fourmis seront notre seul point commun.
Merci, Judy, c'était parfait. Merci beaucoup, obrigada, comme on dit en Portugal. And Anne, please, if you could read for us to finish our panel.
Okay. So wonderful. Thank you, Judy, for reading.
Thank you very much.
This is a poem called Not. Not will, not desire, perhaps prayer. Not still, held. At the end you said, I want to keep my eyes open to miss nothing. Not entreaty, not regret, not future, not past, touch and warm wait. Breath, and again what word can be heard, not loss, not absence, perhaps soul. Not inside, not outside. thus doorway, not alone.
Merci. Thank you, Anne. Thank you very much. And on that note, bom, I'm going to say goodbye in Portuguese. Então, abraço para vocês dois, abraço ao público. Muito obrigada, Judy, Quinn. Muito obrigada, Anne Michaels. E, bom, ficamos por aqui. Continuamos a nos ver aqui no Ronda Poética. Até logo.
Thank you. Thank you.